Thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here in Dublin, and I think that discussing of open innovation, either 1.0 or 2.0, but especially now, I think that the request was, I think, really to assess how the kind of last year's product, which is called Dublin Innovation Declaration, matters for European Commission. Perhaps trying to put this kind of, let's say, very interesting document in kind of a context, I think, of course, I go back to year 2000, and it was kind of a European Council whenever they were agreeing so-called Lisbon strategy. And I think it was a kind of an overall aim was to get Europe up and running. And I think, of course, there was a kind of recognition that I think Europe is lagging behind, especially compared to the US, but also I think that many other emerging economies already at that time. And I think that then it was kind of overall goal to get Europe as the most competitive knowledge-based economy or economic region in the world by 2010. Of course, I remember the discussions afterwards that I think that it was really feasible, that I think that we are putting all kinds of powers which are lying either in the Commission or the European Union on the member states level or being them on local and regional level. And I think because it was very much kind of a huge coordination exercise. It was really trying to align our policies that they are really starting to deliver, and I think we are really in kind of climbing in terms of the competitiveness of the Europe in general, but of course I think that the European companies and European economies. And I think that now we have had the last 5 years kind of a revised version of the Lisbon strategy in place. And I think, of course, the recognition was, I think, 5 years that I think, unfortunately, we were not able really to achieve what we were aiming at, let's say now, 15 years ago. And I think that it was then called now Europe 2020 strategy. It's consisting of 7 flagship initiatives, and perhaps relevant for today's discussion are at least 3 of them. First is Innovation Union, where, of course, I think that now it was kind of a policy objectives that are now behind the Horizon 2020, which is research innovation program, and I think that it's creating that kind of 80 billion kind of a pot of money that we can really use for different type of the innovation-related activities. Of course, then I think to put perhaps today, and I think that whenever it's Robert Madlin, and I think that Bror is here as well, I think, of course, I think this is very much, I think, perhaps more on kind of a online business models. It's ICT driven much more than perhaps legacy industries that I am now representing, not anymore the ICT side of the, let's say, house. So that I'm nowadays for enterprise and industry, and then used to work in information society and nowadays Connect. But of course I can see very huge difference, I think, that how the innovation is perceived in different type of the industrial sectors in Europe. And that's why I think that we have been also having kind of a digital agenda for more or less really seeing that how this kind of, let's say, digital single market should really be established, and how this start to generate certain kind of public goods, and then I think also economic success stories in creating that kind of a right type of the infrastructure, right type of the regulatory environment, and right type of, let's say, creation of the content, and then I think all kind of applications that are really filling the pipes. And now I think that we are also having this industrial policy flagship, which was consisting of 4 big pillars. And first is investments in innovation. Might be saying that it's perhaps more linear way of seeing that how innovation is taking place in kind of industries like steel, aluminium, car industry, shipbuilding, wherever. But I think that, of course, I think that it's very much now, I think that the joint effort in Commission to see that how this kind of innovation is really established, and then I think that rooted in our policies. And of course, I think that if we are now thinking that what was kind of an overall goal of Barroso II Commission was really create smart, sustainable, and inclusive growth, and I think that's still valid, and I guess that whenever the new Commission is, which is emerging out of this political process, I truly believe that the same type of the overall objectives are still valid, even if I think that we are perhaps redefining our policy instruments a bit differently. But thinking of let's say, where we are today's situation in terms of our policies, and I think that they're now trying to reflect that in relation to Dublin Innovation Declaration. Of course, I think that already I think that in ICT part, but nowadays also I think perhaps on the, let's say, the more traditional industrial part, we are starting to see that I think that we are really shifting the focus from research development, perhaps like Richard Schraub was pointing out, and more on innovation. So that I think we are now ready to go closer to the market than perhaps we have been so far been able to do. Of course, I think that then thinking in terms of how this kind of innovation process, this is not as linear as it has been, but I think that how really to start to see the interaction, and I think as you are calling it, mashing up the process of different kind of disciplines. And I think that you can easily see that we are having kind of cross-sectoral approaches on very many issues, and trying really to see that different kind of disciplines and sectors are opening up the mindset also in other fields. Of course, I think that all different kind of new business models have been, let's say, strengthening the understanding that I think that end users are also really key players in kind of innovation process, and I think that how you are really creating the business. And I think that even if perhaps this quadruple helix innovation sounds a bit academic, but I think that, of course, I think that if you are trying to make common sense, I think that if you are identifying those 4 different kind of stakeholders that are needed in that kind of process, being them industry, government, academia, citizens, I guess that makes a lot of sense, and I guess that there is a open mindset nowadays. I think that in European Union try to identify how to make certain kind of political conclusions out of this kind of observation, and I think recognition that I think that if we really want to be head of the game, I think that we have to be open also for that kind of new ways and to see the kind of how innovation is going to happen. As said, I think that we are having kind of a lot of different kind of policy instruments in place. We are having, like Robert was referring, a grand coalition that was announced by President Barroso and then Commissioner Vice President Neelie Kroes. I think we have had, I think also the kind of a Small Business Act. We are having entrepreneurship action plan. There are web entrepreneurs. There are digital entrepreneurship, so that it's kind of both supply and demand side type of the things. And of course, I think that whenever coming from now DG Enterprise, where we are dealing with the kind of more traditional industries, and I think that of course for them ICT solutions are really certain kind of a must at today's situation, so that I think that they are streamlining their processes, and I think that they're trying to find out their way that I think that they can transform their own business models as well as perhaps their product and service portfolios in a way that I think that they are becoming much more competitive in Europe. Then the notion of open platforms, I think of course helps to sell often the intangible products or service worldwide, and I think this question of really that we are looking at the kind of a market creation and user co-creation that are very important, especially for web services. But I think that these are not only, I think that for online business models, but I guess that it's certain thing that we are having the challenge how to really familiarize, and I think that to get also kind of the businesses widely to look at these kind of opportunities. And of course, whenever the question of entrepreneurship, and this is something that perhaps we are seeing now certain kind of a positive development. We are having altogether 21 to 3 million SMEs in Europe. They represent 99.8% of all the companies. And I think that if we are really thinking that where the kind of jobs in today's and I think tomorrow's Europe are coming, I'm pretty sure that this is question of that these SMEs are ready to grow, ready to take risk, and ready to really succeed and even fail. And I think that the kind of a whole of the idea of we are making the second chance real option, and I think that it's something that where we have a lot to learn from the US. I think that how this kind of entrepreneurial business culture is supposed to be established. Okay, if we are then looking at kind of a vision of open innovation 2.0, I think that in a way, I think the elements that are presented there makes a lot of sense in terms of assessing where we are in today's situation in our own policy design. Looking at the smart, sustainable cities, where are the kind of, let's say, environment for different type of new business models and new business opportunities to be created. And I think, of course, this is kind of and I think it was Brura, I guess, that who was saying that I think we are needing certain type of the processes, but also I think the environment where talent can meet talent and where kind of innovation can really take place. And as well as whenever it's said that it's a kind of a cultural issue, and then of course it's a question that we are moving out of the laboratories and trying to establish and see the ecosystems as I think described in your background documentation and being also I think a part of the declaration. Of course, I think we have already, I think, that been through kind of already mentioned living labs, open innovation, clusters, networks, all different kind of social innovation type of things. They are there. Are they mainstreaming? Obviously not. But of course, I think this is something where we are understanding that all different kind of innovation networks, whatever form they are taking, are creating that kind of a cultural background or kind of a platform where we have to really see that I think that something starts really to happen. And of course we really recognize that new innovation needs kind of a lot of human capital, managerial skills. It's a question of how we organizing our, so to say, let's say not only policy making. Policy making is perhaps in this respect mainly to create the framework conditions. And I think then it's very much the question that I think that all other stakeholders are really taking the best out of the kind of framework conditions, and that's where we are at the moment. And thinking of the industrial drivers today, of course I think that there are need for different kind of breakthrough innovations, both in technological terms, but also I think in terms of that we are really breaking the silos. We are trying to create that kind of intersection between disciplines and stakeholder boundaries. And innovation and entrepreneurship are going very closely hand in hand, and I think that that's perhaps where we are seeing now. I think that we are starting to focus on more on perhaps SMEs than to make sure that I think that our traditional national champions are surviving through the difficult times, because I think that's perhaps the kind of a legacy of the European policies that I think that we haven't been really letting any kind of a destruction to happen. I think that's, we are not freeing the resources, we are not freeing kind of new kind of business avenues. But in all, I guess that the challenge is that how the kind of policymakers in Brussels, and also including the national governments, how they really reach out to the kind of SME level. What are the instruments that we can really provide for them? And of course that has been kind of our question. And I think then also understanding the regulatory environment. Whenever we were now looking at where we are in the free movement of goods, we started to see also that kind of a new business models that are servitization of the products or the manufacturing. And also I think that the digitalization of manufacturing, so that you are having very many different kind of trends now emerging that are also to be tested, that whether our regulatory environment is fit for the purpose for today's and tomorrow's kind of new business models. And of course I think that now we are making this kind of a Commission innovation scoreboard, trying really follow how different member states are doing in terms of innovation, and of course then comparing ourselves as a Europe with the US, Japan, Korea, etc. And of course the same notion that I think it was coming from Brur's presentation, that innovation is very spiky in regional terms. We are having kind of innovation leaders that were mentioned, that I think that who the countries that are really doing good or regions that are doing good. But of course then comes the question that I think that we have to, as a kind of policymakers, make sure that I think that this kind of let's say strengthening the already strong regions is one way, but of course I think we are having the obligation really to make sure that I think that we are finding the ways for all different kind of regions to make their kind of a future also in this European Union. And of course I think there is then kind of instruments available for us. I already mentioned Horizon 2020. To my mind, I think that compared to the kind of old world where we had the Framework Program 7 and then the separate SIP program, Competitiveness and Innovation Program, now we are having all kind of instruments in one single framework. If we are able to use together with the member states and all the stakeholders the best out of these instruments, I think nothing prevents us really to be supportive for the kind of very innovative innovation models, including Open Innovation 2.0. We are having the SME instrument. We try to really focus that I think we are reaching out to the kind of SMEs and making them as easy as possible to use also that kind of innovation funding through the kind of EU funds. But perhaps more importantly, try to make sure that I think whatever we do all together in Europe, we are also, I think, that very much aligning ourselves the terms what the member states and the private sector is doing, that we are having the participation from the private sector, and then also I think the kind of regional policies are aligned for that. And that's why we are having the smart specialization in our cohesion or the regional funds. And I think this is the true test case now for the kind of regions of Europe to define their own strengths that they want to build on. And I think that that's where perhaps the innovation comes to the building picture, that I think that they are really, I think that responsibility collectively for all kind of public and private stakeholders at the moment. And then we are having so-called COSME program, which is the competitiveness of SMEs. And I think there are the new financial instruments, being the venture capital or loan guarantees. And I think that they are kind of instruments that have been, I think, widely used. And I think that we are quite happy that they have been very successful instruments to really run out this kind of innovation in Europe. Altogether, this innovation ecosystem explained, I think that what I think that is trying to identify all different kind of types of the innovation, like also Richard Straub was defining. I think that they are all needed and they are part of the picture. And of course, I think that open innovation definitely is perhaps the growing part of that kind of innovation landscape. And to understanding it as an ecosystem, I think that gives us certain kind of, let's say, tools to assess what type of the activities and instruments are best fit for the purpose. Thank you.